We'll have fewer and fewer people, but I think this session is going to be really interesting. At least those of us up here, we know it's very exciting for us. In spite of what it said on the schedule, it had a different name. What this session is about is the whole focus of this conference, which is working with those in extreme poverty and being able to lift the 100 million out of extreme poverty. And what we'll be talking about in this session is a tried and tested model to make that happen. We have some extremely important people on the panel, and I'll start from the very end. Shameran Abed is the director of the BRAC Microfinance program, which covers about 5 million clients. Then Anne Hastings, who used to be the CEO of Foncosi and now is with Action International. She's lived in Haiti for many years and started a graduation program there. And Mariella, who you heard from yesterday, Mariella is with Plan International. She started a graduation program in the highlands of Peru, and now you're based in Paraguay. And I'm Hashemi. I'm from BRAC, and I also work a little bit with CGAP and primarily on the graduation program. So what we'll do is we'll start with Shameran to tell us a little bit about BRAC's ultra-poor program, how this started, what are some of the components, and what do they see happening at the ground level. Shameran?
Thanks a lot, Hashemi bhai. It's a pleasure to speak to you again today. And for those of you who were at the plenary yesterday, maybe one or two of the things that I'm going to say might be a little bit of a repetition. But I thought that since we're doing a little bit more of a deep dive into the graduation model today, that I'll talk a little bit about why BRAC got into work with the ultra poor as a separate segment. And also a little bit about the key components of the BRAC ultra-poor model. BRAC, for those of you who are not very aware of BRAC, BRAC is an organization that started in Bangladesh in the early 1970s, following Bangladesh's war of independence. And when BRAC started mainly as a relief and rehabilitation organization, and over time moved into long-term community development. So BRAC has large programs in health, in education, a large microfinance portfolio, and also other programs in community empowerment, human rights and legal services, agriculture value chains, and so on. So in the late 1990s, early 2000s, BRAC started thinking about the issue of extreme poverty differently from how it was thinking about extreme poverty earlier on. Microfinance was already by this time, as you know, a fairly large and stable phenomenon in Bangladesh. Bangladesh microfinance had already been around at this point for almost 20 years. And what we were finding was that the people who were in extreme poverty were not being served by our microfinance program. And that's not just the BRAC microfinance program, but what we found is the entire microfinance sector in Bangladesh was leaving out the extreme poor. And this is because of a number of reasons. One was, of course, the microfinance institutions themselves didn't find the extreme poor to be creditworthy. So even though we were saying that microfinance was reaching the poorest, actually we were not lending to the poorest. Second of all, the people in ultra poverty were not coming into the microfinance space. So there was a level of self-exclusion taking place from the microfinance sector. And that's because these people didn't have enough confidence, didn't have enough social capital, didn't have obviously any assets or capacity to save, some of the things that were sort of prerequisites to come into the microfinance space. And thirdly, there was community ostracization for these people. So in the microfinance space, we had the group model, and the groups were very important in choosing and selecting microfinance clients. And what we found was the microfinance group members were were ensuring that the ultra poor are kept out of the microfinance space. So for these reasons, we found that microfinance, either wasn't reaching the ultra poor, or even if they were reaching the ultra poor, was not actually the right interventions for the ultra poor. So with that in mind, BRAC designed a completely different targeted ultra poor program. What we did in effect was combine a lot of the interventions that we were doing already in education and health. We took some of the lessons of the safety net kinds of programs, which was a little bit of a cash transfer, a large asset transfer. And we designed a program which was targeted at the ultra poor, but which was basically based on an asset transfer model. So this was started in 2002. The reason why we called it, or why it came to be known as a graduation program, is because it's a time-bound program. It's a 2-year program. So for 2 years, we provide a lot of support to these ultra-poor families. And at the end of the 2 years, we hope that these families will graduate out of extreme poverty or ultra-poverty. And we have some specific criteria to judge whether they are graduating out of ultra-poverty or not. So I'll just quickly take you through some of the key components of the program. So the program starts with a very rigorous targeting process. The reason why we do this is obviously because we want to make sure that we are actually bringing the ultra poor into the program and not people who live above the ultra poverty line. As I mentioned yesterday, the ultra poverty line is roughly, as you know, there's a $1.25 a day extreme poverty line. When we talk about the ultra poor, it's people who live below half of that. So it's people who live below 60 or 70 cents a day. And the ultra poor are also defined by many other factors, among which they have very little or no productive assets. They have little or no savings. They live lives of extreme vulnerability. They lack, in a lot of places, they lack access to sanitation and water. They don't have access to employment or are not employed, or potentially, sometimes are seasonally employed but without any regular jobs. So these are some of the key characteristics that we look for when we select the ultra poor. So the program starts with targeting, and the way we do the targeting is through a participatory rural appraisal. So we go to the communities, we get the communities involved, and the communities basically do a participatory wealth ranking of all the households in a particular village. And through that, we figure out who are the poorest people in that village and who we're actually trying to target for the ultra poor program. The second component, and a big part of the model, is a large asset transfer. So whereas a lot of graduation models or other type of safety net or social protection schemes go with large cash transfer, whether conditional or unconditional, one of the main things about the BRAC ultra poor model is it's based on a large asset transfer. So we transfer a sizable amount of productive assets to these ultra poor households. The third component is cash stipends. So after we do the asset transfer, for a certain period of time, we also provide a cash transfer or a cash stipend to these households. The cash stipend is typically quite a small stipend, and the main reason we do the stipend is so that the households can get themselves through the period while the asset becomes productive. So once we transfer the asset, it always takes a bit of time for the asset to start paying off. So while the asset becomes productive, we want to make sure that these households still have some money coming in with which they can pay for the daily needs and make sure that they're still eating and the basic calorie needs are being met. So that's the stipend, and what we don't want is for the stipend to be spent on other things or the stipend to be saved. We want the stipend to be spent on consumption. Then there is a very intensive hands-on training component, so we want to make sure that these households are taught how to use the assets, how to make the assets productive. So it's not just transferring an asset and then letting them be, it's trying to help them to make sure that the assets are being properly used. And there are other life skills that are also taught. There is also a major savings component. We want to make sure that these households start a savings behavior from very early on, because one of the things that we say is part of the way to get a very poor household to go from coping to thinking about actually planning for the future happens when they start to save. So till they start to save, it's all about your daily needs and coping with the daily emergencies. But once a household can get on a savings plan, then they're actually starting to plan for the future. So the savings is a big part of it. What we do try to do is, with the savings, is we try not to bother with how much people are saving. We're more interested in making sure the savings are happening regularly. So even if it's very small amounts of money, we want to make sure that they're saving regularly, because that shows a level of financial planning and discipline that we want to see in the ultra-poor households. Other than that, in the Bangladesh model, there's a big healthcare component, and that's because health shocks, obviously, as you know, in many countries, is one of the major shocks that lead people to move back into poverty. So because BRAC already had a large health program, we made sure that all our ultra-poor participants had free access to our health program and had free access to basic health care. The final and very important component is the social reintegration. So one of the key components of our model is we're not just interested in building financial or economic capital, we're also interested in building social capital. So we want to make sure that these ultra-poor households or these families in ultra-poverty are getting reintegrated back into society, that they're very much part of the community and they're not either left out, excluded, or ostracized. And we feel that that's one of the best ways to make sure that even once the program ends, the progress continues and they can sustain the gains they make while they're in the program. So there is a big component which deals with making sure that these families are reintegrated into the society. What we do is, in every village where we work with the ultra-poor program, we set up a village poverty reduction committee. These committees are basically comprised of the village elites and local elders. And what we say to them is, you are now responsible for making sure that these ultra-poor households are getting the support they need, that the assets that we're providing them are being protected. And if there are short-term emergencies or shocks, that you come together and try to help out these households as much as possible. So those are the key components of the BRAC ultra-poor program. It's now a 12-year-old program. As I said yesterday, it's been researched and evaluated quite substantially, and the results that we're seeing from that is extremely positive. And one of the main positive things that we're seeing is people are not only improving the livelihoods, the income, the assets are not only improving over the 2-year period of the program, but these are sustaining over time. And even when we go back and look at the first cohort of our ultra-poor program, which was the 2002 to 2004 2-year program, and now they're 10 years out of the program, when we continue to go back and look at those families, most of those families are still progressing, and incomes are rising, assets are rising, and that's very promising. So I think I'll stop there for now and allow the others to come in.
Thank you, Shameran. Anne, talk about your experiences with Federation and why you took on the graduation.
Yes. Can you please bring up my slides? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I thought that it would be helpful for us to have a visual sense of what we're talking about. So I wanted to start by taking you on the journey that I went through in becoming convinced that we did need a program like BRAC's program. And by the way, we were one of the earliest replicators of their program in a country that's a very difficult country to operate in. So when I first went to Haiti in 1996, this is some of what I saw. And what I discovered is that when you give these people accessible, affordable financial services, and by that I mean not just credit, but savings and remittances, that good things begin to happen. Not working. As you can see here, they're receiving their financial services. I hope this is going to work. This only works well if it goes fast through this, so I'm sorry if it's not. Their businesses start to grow, their children go to school, and they get food on their table every day. And in some cases, hello? And then when you add to those services educational services, you see that even more exciting things start to happen. And businesses do grow. But what we discovered in Haiti, as Shameran described, is that finally we realized there were lots of people who we were not reaching at all. We weren't reaching them for exactly the same reasons that Shameran gave. In some cases, they were afraid to come into us. They didn't know how to come to us. In other cases, our solidarity groups were keeping them out. In other cases, we just didn't know they were there because they were so hidden from view. And what did they look like? They looked like this, instead of looking like this. This is a normal microfinance client. And they live like this instead of like this. So this is the difference between people living on $1.25 a day and people living in ultra poverty. And it is the case that they're living on much less than the $1.25 a day. And then I had the opportunity to go to Bangladesh. And I was so excited when I visited BRAC and I saw women who were living like the same way that women in Haiti were living. They were living completely without any kind of hope. They had no productive assets. Absolutely none of their children were in school. They were hungry. In other words, they were not just food insecure, but they were food insecure with hunger, meaning they would go for 1 or 2 days at a time with absolutely no food going into their bodies. And so from that experience of learning about the BRAC program, we added to our staircase out of poverty, which we had become kind of famous for, because we did believe that people can make their way out of poverty. And as you see on this staircase, the staircases are each step is so big, it's bigger than the person, but they can struggle to make their way up there. They do fall off, but if our loan officers struggled with them and helped them pick themselves up, they could make it. But there were still these people below who were not yet on the ladder at all. And what we learned is that by replicating the BRAC program, we could, in fact, help those people also get onto the staircase out of poverty. Now, in our replication of the program, it was very, very similar to the way BRAC did it. We got a huge amount of technical assistance from BRAC, and we never could have run the program without having that technical assistance. In fact, at the very beginning, I sent a team of 7 people, the director of the program, plus all of our initial case managers, to Bangladesh. And they stayed there, I believe it was for 6 weeks. And they got thoroughly educated on the program. They went to very many places in the very rural areas where the program existed, and they learned everything about the program. They came back completely changed individuals. And one thing I will say about what we learned from BRAC is the importance of discipline in this program. Now, in Haiti, bringing discipline to our staff was a major challenge. And yet, I couldn't believe how much the staff that was going to work on our program had changed while they were in Bangladesh. They did learn that every single participatory wealth ranking that they did had to be done in a certain way. They had to have the maps of where every single person in the community lived. They had to have the group telling them which of those are the most, the poorest. And they had to have discussions with the community about what that kind of poverty did to people. They had to develop the village committee that would look after the poor in their committee. So every step that Shameran just described, we had in the same way. As I said, for entry, the analysis that we did in the communities, they had to have no productive assets. They didn't have a chicken that could lay an egg. They didn't have any land that they could plant on. They had nothing. And none of their children were in school, even though they were of school age. And they were food insecure with hunger. We started our pilot program with just 150 families in 3 different sections of our country. And what we learned is how incredibly important healthcare was. So when we went to scale the program up, we scaled it up in a region of the country where we could access the services of Partners in Health, Izamal Hall. Many of you may have heard of Dr. Paul Farmer, who himself learned a lot from BRAC. But our clients all had access to health care, as did Shameran's. The one thing we had to add was housing. We had to provide our members with the materials that they would need to construct their own homes, because most of them were living in a way that you would not describe as a home. In addition to our staff going over to Bangladesh to train, Bangladesh BRAC also sent us a full-time permanent person to Haiti for the first year of our program. That was another piece of instrumental help. She was my check. She would tell me whenever she felt that any of our staff were falling down and not doing what they were supposed to do. I think one thing that is really critically important here is what we call the case manager. That person who was assigned to 50 families and made the visit. In our first year, they made 2 visits a week to each family. And then as we scaled it up, they cut back to 1 visit a week. But it is so hard to reach these people. But that 1 visit every week is a critical component to building the members' self-confidence, to making them feel that someone actually cares about what they're doing. So I want to quickly just tell you the story of one of our clients. This woman was a teenager living with her mother and her sister when she first got pregnant. And then the man that that fathered her first child left. She met another man, still as a teenager. She got pregnant again, and he also abandoned her. When we found her, she was living at home with her mother, who by then was taking care of 3 children who were the children of her sister who had died. So this woman had in her home the one daughter who was still alive, plus 5 children. And this woman that you see here on the screen had nothing. She had absolutely nothing to start with. The mother was trying to do everything. So this woman became the member of Chemin La Vie Mio. That's the name of our program, and it means a pathway to a better life. And we have each of our members begin with 2 ways to generate income. So she was given 3 goats, and she was given a little bit of small commerce that she could start selling. But the turning point for her was when she was given the materials to build her own house. So she built a 1-room house with the help of our staff. For the first time in her life, she had access to a latrine in her yard. She said before that, they had to go to an empty field down the road. But that changed. That gave her such a sense of independence to be able to have that 1-room home. She took really good care of her goats, and so not long into it, you went to visit her, and she now had 7 goats, plus she had a cow because she had changed her goats. She had sold some of the goats she had to buy a cow. She said to us, well, our case manager explained to us that you don't keep animals just for the point of keeping them. You have to make a business out of them. So I'm going to get rid of this cow because the cow has not been able to produce a calf. And so since then, she graduated into our TCRAD program. Our CLM program is 18 months. And then there's a 6-month program where they get a very small loan for 1 month, then a loan for 2 months, and then a loan for 3 months, and then they graduate. So she had 3 loans there. Now she has, since then, had 4 more loans in a regular Solidarity Group program, and her loan size is now $160. This is the kind of women that we have coming through our program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. Mariella?
Thank you. I won't repeat the components that Shameran has already explained, and yesterday you were able to see a little bit of the video going to the area where Plan implemented the project. But I'd like to give a little bit of background on Plan and why we decided to get involved in this. We're a 77-year-old organization. Our focus is child rights, child-centered community development. Our intention is to be able to provide help to poor children, marginalized children in very poor communities, and work with the government, with the duty bearer in terms of them being able to provide those services. We're a sponsorship organization. Globally, we have 1.3 million sponsors who every month, every year, give a certain stipend support to Plan, and that is used to carry out community development projects. However, once upon a time, Plan used to take that money that sponsors gave us and give it directly to the families that were being sponsored. And we stopped doing that. We stopped doing that about 25, 30 years ago because what we found is that that created dependency. It created division in the community. It said, you get, but you don't get. And so that ends up causing sometimes a number of problems, and we didn't see that it was really working in any kind of way to reduce dependency and to help people make their way out of poverty. Perhaps it had a role once upon a time, but you know, like all of the organizations that are working in development, we learn, times change, the context changes, and so we stopped doing that. And we used the sponsorship funding to help carry out community development programs. When the model came out, and we were asked to participate in this, and Plan implemented this in Honduras and also in Peru, we had a lot of concerns with it. We said, we've done that already. We've done the direct handouts. It doesn't work. It creates division in the areas where we're working. It's not a good idea. Also, you know, as an organization, we are committed to reaching the extreme poor, but we also know how difficult that is. And we're working in communities that are poor. But trying to be able to get to that absolute bottom layer is the part that is difficult, even for organizations like us, where we go and all of the people in the community are poor. Being able to really drill down with a sharper tool and get down to that bottom level, that's the challenge. So one of the, as I mentioned, one of the big concerns we had is giving cash. Been there, done that, it doesn't work. Hashemi, thank you very much. We don't believe it's going to work. The other thing is that it's time bound. So trying to be able to go down to the bottom of that pyramid and say that within 2 years, I'm going to be able to help the people at the very bottom to start walking, not only start walking, but be able to pull their family up and be able to have a business that is generating income and to be able to save and to be credit worthy, because we're talking about the non-productive poor. Not that they're not working, they are working, they're struggling every day. But to be able to, within 2 years, get them from the bottom, walking up and running successful businesses, savings, being credit worthy, and all of that. That was the second concern that we had. And then we were, I think, the 8th or the 9th pilot site, and we talked about costs and where we're going to do this. And BRAC and Forward really wanted us to do this in the high Andean region of Peru. If we had done it in another part of the country, it would have been cheaper, it would have been easier, but here we're talking about very remote areas, 4,500 meters above sea level, where you have to walk hours, not to get to the community, but to get from one house in the community to the other. Very difficult conditions, where the government wasn't yet, even though there are these conditional cash transfer programs, they weren't having the effective outreach because the areas are difficult to reach. Indigenous communities, oftentimes the government worker doesn't speak Quechua, doesn't effectively engage with the families. So we had a whole host of concerns, but we were committed to trying to find a way to reach the extreme poor, trying to also be able to influence these government programs, saying that a piece that's missing has to actually be added on, which is the accompaniment, which was actually also another concern for us. Weekly visits is what we were being asked to do. We got it down to 3 visits a month, but we ended up finding out that that was actually the most important component of the project, because when you're working with the extreme poor, there are a whole number of issues, as my colleagues have already mentioned, and as I mentioned yesterday, that one has to go overcoming. First of all, as I mentioned yesterday, the vision. When we started with this visioning exercise, how do you see yourself now, and how do you want to see yourself in 1 or 2 years? Most of the families had never even thought about it. And, you know, sitting down, getting them to sit down as a family with markers on paper and write this out, draw it out, was a very powerful exercise, because they are allowing themselves for the first time to dream and to think of something better, and that they can do this. The idea of extreme poverty and exclusion, and yes, we all believe very much that people, no matter how poor they are, can make their own decisions. The problem is that sometimes they have stopped hoping, or they've never really known how to hope. I'd like to, if you could put up the slide, please, with the ranking slide. This is how we did our participatory wealth ranking exercise. Because we were a pilot, we had to have control families in the treatment villages and also control families in villages that weren't receiving the project. But the first thing was to identify who the extreme poor were, who the bottom rung was in each community. And it wasn't a figure, it wasn't a $1.25 figure. What we did is we basically divided the families. We asked the communities to do this in a participatory way. Who has the most? And those names went into one box. Who has average amount? And that went into another box. Who has very little? That went into another box. And who has almost nothing? And those names went into another box. because there were trials being done, those who had almost nothing were sorted. Some of them were selected for the project and some of them were not. The ones that were going to be the control families obviously did not receive the project. Before this exercise, we explained in general terms what the project was about. But after families were selected, we went into more detail and we explained that you're going to get a stipend, if you're not already receiving one from the government, that you're going to get an asset transfer, that you're going to get this intensive package. They won the lottery, right? One would think that they would be happy. And perhaps they were happy, but many of them surprised us and said, this project is not for us. It's going to fail if you do it with us. It's better that you do it with the families that have something or the ones that have more, because if you do it with us, it's going to fail. And also the families that had more or that had something said, if you do it with them, it's going to fail. Don't do it with them. They're alcoholics, they're lazy, they never come and participate in the community meetings. In the high Andean regions, there's a very strong community cohesiveness. So when something happens, it's expected that everybody comes out and helps to work as a community to get over things. And these are the people that weren't showing up for those things. These were the people really on the fringes, very invisible. So here we had the people that had quote unquote won the lottery, and even the other ones who were better off, both of them saying, this isn't for them. They will fail. And so that was already the first obstacle that we had to get over, is talking to these families, accompanying them, showing them that yes, one, you have every right and you are able and you are worthy to be able to do this project, and we're going to accompany you every step of the way here. The other thing that for me was quite overwhelming, and I visited these communities at the beginning when we first started, when the families were selected, and at the end, and you know, to see some of these families, these women, break down, not because they had won the quote-unquote lottery, as I use the term, you know, a bit dramatically here, but because somebody was now going to go and see them. And for them, that ended up becoming one of the most important components of the project, that somebody is coming to see me, somebody is going to come and talk to me, somebody is going to help me with the different problems that I have, just to be there as, to hold my hand, as Hashemi calls it, to provide that peer support, to help me believe in myself, because that staircase, I love the staircase photo. I think that there's so many different rungs in there where people fall back. We're talking about communities, as I mentioned yesterday, that had high rates of alcoholism, high rates of violence in all of its forms. It was pretty difficult, and we picked areas where we weren't working in yet because we wanted to really test the model, and because also, as I mentioned, I didn't really believe that it would work in that time-bound way, so we went and made the challenge really, really difficult. So having to overcome all of those different obstacles, the lack of belief in oneself, the violence that these people were facing every day from other family members, dealing with the gender issues. We had a lot of deaths as well. A lot of people died of alcohol-related diseases or things that had been accumulating over time. And still being able to accompany them and their families and get them through these difficult situations. As planned, because we're a child-focused organization, one of the criteria that we put is for the families to participate, they had to have children under the age of 14. And that's just something to make it relevant to an organization like us to participate in a project like this. And child protection and gender are two themes that for us run through everything that we do. It doesn't matter that this is a microfinance project, it doesn't matter that this is an education project. What matters is that we have to make sure that no harm comes to any children in our projects, and that includes trying to change those attitudes in the families. And this is where we started to get other surprises. Like, you know, when I'd go back and visit those families, you know, and they talk about how their businesses are now successful, how they're making money, that they are, you know, earning, in some cases, their businesses are earning 2 times what the conditional cash transfer amount is, that they sit there and they say, now I'm able to, we have peace in our house. We can have a conversation. I can have a conversation with my children, with my husband. I tell my child that I love them. And I don't know, it's such a small thing, but imagine if you grew up and not once in your life Did your parents, the people most important to you, tell you that you mattered, that they loved you, and how your life would be different? All those opportunities that you were able to grab along the way to get you to, you know, a conference like this and to the successes in your life. Imagine if you didn't have that small thing that costs absolutely nothing. And so now that harmony that they have in their home, and they talk about the most important thing in the project is that part of it, that software. And that didn't cost a lot of money, but it was such an enabler, such a powerful enabler that I don't have any more doubts that those families are going to be able to continue walking. And really this project is about starting to walk. It's not about the top rung of the staircase. It's about how do you get people to start walking and believe in themselves and be able to deal with the different shocks that they're going to find along the way. There's so many different stories that I have of the people that I've met along the way, from the beginning, you know, where they didn't believe that they could do this, and to the end where now you feel so great about how their lives have changed because of the hand-holding, because of the accompaniment, because of that visioning exercise, because that they could believe that they can have something better in their life. I really get very passionate about this, and this, again, I've moved from a position of doubt, it's not going to work. It's fine in Bangladesh where you can massify, but to a position of really being convinced. And again, the call to all of you here in whatever organization, whatever types of organizations that you're in, the key is how do we focus better? Not that all of our projects are going to be directed to the extreme poor, but how do we focus better to ensure that our programming is not exclusive, but that it's inclusive, and that we see those people who have always been there, but that we've had the blinders on because they don't have a piece of land to do a food security project, or because they don't speak up, because we think maybe they're lazy and so they're not going to work. And one more point, I think the time is running over, but we had to also come to terms with a higher tolerance for failure, because this project is not about the 95% who will repay their loan. This project is talking about 60% graduation rates, 65% graduation rates. So you're going to have a higher rate of failure than most donors or most organizations are willing to deal with, and a higher cost. But if we are committed to reaching the extreme poor and not excluding them, then we also have to have a tolerance for being able to go the extra mile and, you know, deal with a higher rate of failure. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to share with you now a 3-minute video on a BRAC client. Could you put that up now?
নমস্কার, আমার নাম ছবি। 2006 সালের গরু পালনের সদস্য। আপনারা আমার বাড়িতে আসেন। আমার বাবার বাড়িতে আমরা খুব কষ্টে মানুষ আছি। আমরা ভালো মন্দ খেতে পেতাম না, কোনো কিছু খাবার মনালে আমার বাবা জোটাতে পারতো না। পরে আমার যখন 14 বছর বয়স হয় তখন আমার বাবা বিয়ে দেয়। ভালো জামা কাপড় পরাতে পারে না, অভাবিক মানুষ, একটা খোরাক কমে গেলে তাদের হয়তো বা শ্বশুর বাড়িতে আসে আমি আবার ওই রকমই পড়ে গেলাম। এক অভাবী হতো, দিন মজুরি কাজ করে, একদিন করে 4 দিন করে না। এখানে আসে আমার খায় না খায় দিন যায়। এখানে আসে তখন আমার বাচ্চা হয়, বাচ্চা হয়ে তখন আমরা দুধ কিনে খাওয়াতে পারি না, তখন আমার খুব অসুখ। একটু যে বাচ্চাটা বুকের দুধ পাবে 1 ফোঁটাও পাইনি। ভাতের মার ময়দা গুলে ওইটুক বাচ্চাকে আমরা আর বাঁচাতে পারি। আমার একটা বাচ্চা মারা গেল, আমি কোনোভাবে তাকে মানুষ করতে পারলাম না, ভালো খাওয়াতে পারলাম না। আমার একটা বাচ্চা হলে আমি কিভাবে তাকে বাঁচাবো? যার কারণে আমি ছুটি তুলে নিয়ে আসি, ছুটি খুঁজে বাড়লি বের করে আমি একটু একটু করে রাখে দিই। সেই সুটি জাল দিয়ে নগদে চিনি কিনতে পারি না, কোথায় থেকে জুটাবো? আমার স্বামী তেমন কাজ কাম করে না। তখন ওই সুটি জালতে জালতে খুঁড়ে তখন আমি ওই বাচ্চাটাকে মানুষ করে তারপর আবার একটা বাচ্চা, নাই আমাদের কাপড় চোপড়, নাই আমাদের বিছনা কাঁথা, নাই আমাদের ঘর দরজা, বহু কষ্টে ওই বাচ্চাটাকে নিয়ে আমি তখন থাকি। আকাশে যখন বৃষ্টি আসে ঘরে শোয়ার মতন আমাদের পরিবেশ নাই, বৃষ্টি পরে কাদা হয়ে যায়, ছিঁড়া কাঁথা ন্যাকড়া টানা এগুলো দিয়ে ছালে ঢাকে, তুমি বৃষ্টির মধ্যে ছালেরা বসে থাকতে থাকতে ডুবে যায়। ব্রাক থেকে টেলিং পেলাম, 3 দিন পর 3টা টিন দিল, টিন আনে গরুর ঘর করলাম, গরুর ঘর করে 2টা গরু পালাম, 2টা গরু এনে পুষতে 2টা গরুর থেকে পালতে পালতে 8টা গরু হলো। 8টা গরুর মধ্যে আমি 5টা গরু বিক্রি করলাম, 5টা গরু বিক্রি করে 1,35,000 টাকা খরচা করে আমি 2টা ঘর করেছি, 2টা ইটের ঘর করেছি। এখন আমার 3টা গরু আছে, 5-6টা ছাগল আছে, 15-20টা মুরগি আছে, 10টা হাঁস আছে। হাঁসের ডিম বিক্রি করি, হাঁস বিক্রি করি, মুরগির ডিম বিক্রি করি, মুরগি বিক্রি করি, বরকির বাচ্চা বিক্রি করি, করে টাকা দিয়ে আমি 1 বিঘা জমি খালাসি, সেখান থেকে ধান কিছু পাই। আগে খুব কষ্টের দিন ছিল, সেই দিনগুলো এখন নেই। এখন আমার অত অভাব নেই, অত কষ্ট নেই, আমি বাচ্চা কাচ্চাকে ভালো খাওয়াতে পারি, ভালো পড়াতে পারি। আমি এখন অনেক টাকা পয়সা করেছি। ব্রাক থেকে পায়খানা পাচ্ছি, টিউবওয়েল পাচ্ছি, চিকিৎসা পাচ্ছি, গরুর ভ্যাকসিন দিছে, কৃমির ওষুধ দিছে, চিকিৎসা দিছে। ব্রাক আমাদের যথেষ্ট ভালো করছে, এরকম উপকার আমরা কোথাও পাইনি। আমরা যখন আমাদের গরু দিল, আমরা যে কত খুশি হলাম আর কত আনন্দ হলাম, আমরা মালিকের কাছে তাদের কত আশীর্বাদ করলাম। এখনো আমরা করতেছি যে আমাদের ভালো রাখিছে, আমরা ভালো আছি, তারাও ভালো থাক, তারা আরও যারা পাবার আছে তাদের দেখ, তাদের বুকে হাসি ফুটুক, তাদেরকে দেখ, আমরা এইটুকু চাই।
So before we open up for any questions you may have, let's just try to sum up what's being said. Can I have the PowerPoint? All right, very briefly, the main point that everyone said was that microfinance works and it does improve people's capacity to earn, but for the most part, and there are very few exceptions to this, but for the most part, credit reaches those around the poverty line. It does not work with those who are destitute or in extreme poverty. And so what this program does, our graduation does, is work with those in extreme poverty. And once again, that is the major target of the Microcredit Summit. Oops. What happened? All right. They talked about the model. Remember, it's extremely carefully sequenced set of interventions. We know of many government programs that hands out cash. We know of many government programs that gives livestock. Maybe they give out land. But these handouts or these transfers by themselves have never succeeded in being able to transform more than a fraction of the people they reach out to. So that's why, through years of experience, they figured out you needed to be carefully sequenced with a lot of different activities. And that's the consumption support, the savings, access to finance, the training, the asset transfer, and the coaching, the hand-holding that they've all talked about, which is extremely important. So the 5 building blocks are essential to the model. Now, when we started to look at BRAC and what BRAC was achieving, we wanted to spread that throughout the world, but most people said it didn't work, it couldn't work. It's just something that's unique to BRAC and to Bangladesh. So we started by testing this model in 10 sites in 8 countries, and you heard from Anne about Haiti and Mariela about the achievements in Peru. And I also use, I think 3 of us use the same slide. It's Foncosi's vision of staircase out of poverty. It is slow, gradual, but the important thing is it's about building ladders. Once again, it's not going to be a government cash transfer program that's going to be achieving this long graduate step. It's necessary to start with that, but doesn't get through these ladders. After we've been talking about the graduation program, we've tested it, we've got extremely good results from all the impact studies. And these are randomized controlled trials that establish causality. There's great interest all over the world, from Rio to Ghana to Tanzania to Indonesia, Philippines, on using this as part of a well-integrated social protection program. Now, even though each of the speakers talked about the great success of this program, nobody indicated that this was the only way to reach the 100 million or to reach the several hundred millions to get out of extreme poverty. Challenging extreme poverty will take a lot more than that. We will need government assistance to the elderly, to the disabled, people who are suddenly faced with shocks. So safety nets, food for work programs, CCT program, transfer programs will be a long-term way through which we provide food security to many. However, we can build ladders, but then the asset transfer program, the graduation program, isn't going to be for everyone. It will be for a significant majority of people. In some cases, even microcredit could work. Rare cases, but it could work. Wage employment is going to be one massive way to get a lot of people out of extreme poverty. So all the programs for infrastructure, communications, government, economic programs, private sector involvement will be essential. But along with that, we really have to be building markets, managing natural resources, creating healthcare systems, creating education systems, and ensuring citizenship, accountability of poor people over government institutions, and of course, ensuring stable macro policies. What we have pointed out, though, is one staircase, one way, which has proven to be extremely successful, through which many millions of poor people could achieve that pathway out of extreme poverty. So I'll stop there. Just wanted to sum up what's being said. Too easy to be critical, say, well, that's what you're saying is going to happen, but, you know, what about wage employment? What about other things? So that's why I wanted to position this in a much broader analytics of extreme poverty. So we'll start with if you have any questions to any of the participants. Is there somebody with you? There's a couple. We'll take those. And do please state your name and the organization you work with.
No, I can speak later. Don't worry.
Okay. Oh, go ahead. So I know this program is quite new, and I think it's just terrific. My question is, have you been able to do kind of a follow-up to see where these people are, not 2 or 3 years out, but 5 to 10 years out? Do they continue to move up this metaphorical ladder, or what happens to them?
BRAC has been doing it for the longest, so I'll turn to Shameran for the impact assessment results.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are two. You see, the program has been researched by several different organizations. So there has been external RCT studies of the BRAC model done by the London School of Economics. And what that looked at was 2 years after graduation and 4 years after graduation. So the external RCT results that we have takes you up to 4 years after graduation, and that's shown quite a lot of improvement, continuing even well past the program ending or the 2-year intervention period ending. There has been internal BRAC research. BRAC has a research and evaluation division which is internal. That has researched and continues to research even, like I said, people who graduated out of our ultra-poor program 10 years ago. And even with our internal research, we've seen that the vast majority are continuing to progress. There are some people that have sort of slid back into ultra-poverty, but the percentage of that is actually very small. And obviously, it's not just, I mean, there are lots of shocks, there are macroeconomic issues that can slide people back into poverty, but even then, we've seen that even through price hikes of essential foods, even through floods and other natural disasters, graduates of our ultra-poor program are fairly resilient and have been able to absorb quite a lot of shocks without actually backsliding into ultra-poverty. So even 10 years on, we are seeing most people continue to progress and continue to be going up that metaphorical ladder.
Yeah, my name is Patricia Pulido. I'm from a very tiny grassroots organization in Italy, ACAF Italia. We are working with a savings group in Europe, trying to reach the poorest in Europe through microfinance. So my question is, well, you have been talking a lot, and the way you talk about poverty is not only, you don't use so much economical, you don't talk so much about money. That impressed me so much. You talk a lot about experiences. You talk about people, situation. So money, this micro money that we can say microcredit or microfinance, is just one of the elements of this micro experience. You are, if we want to reach the poorest of the poor, money is just one of that things. So even the ladder we saw there's no. I couldn't see any coin, just people helping each other. So my question is, why is the microcredit is just one of this component? Why we are still using the poverty line $1.25? I mean, what we are still using just economical indicators? Thank you.
Right. I think what the speakers talked about was not just economic poverty, but about alienation, about estrangement, about exclusion. So I'll ask both Anne and Mariela to say a few things about how you're looking at the whole issue of graduation, the non-economic dimension.
Yeah, I think for my organization, Foncose, you use the $1.25 line because the World Bank has set that as the indicator. And we were using, before we ever found out about this program, we were using the Progress Out of Poverty Index, which would give us that information. But we always combined it with a bigger understanding of what the client's situation was. So we always combined it with a food security survey. And then we also had in it the kind of visual measures that you want, that you can only get if you actually visit a person at their home. You need to see, and Professor Yunus says this, why don't we just walk around and look at how these people are living, and you can see they're living in extreme poverty. So we would use things like assets and what their house was made out of and whether they had their children in school and those kinds of things. But, you know, what can I say? The World Bank has set a goal of, in 2030, to eliminate extreme poverty. That makes it something that you can rally around. And they're using this guideline of below $1.25. What I think we learned from BRAC is that in addition to all the measures we were already using, the best thing, the most reliable thing, is to go to the community and talk to the community about who is really poor and have them define for you what poverty means to them. So I agree with you 100% that the $1.25 line is not that great. I mean, it's not that helpful. But when you're talking across all these countries and across 1.2 billion people that are still living below that $1.25 line, it gives you a sense of the scale. I think Shameran said yesterday that the people that are in Bangladesh who are eligible are living below 60, 70 cents. And he estimates that worldwide there are about a half a billion, 500 million people. What I can say is that in Haiti, which of course is a very poor country, in the rural areas, it's about 15% of the population that we find eligible for CLM. I would underscore, however, that the worst thing you can do is bring a person into the ultra poor program if they could make it with a loan. So when we go in and do that participatory wealth ranking, we make decisions about this person can go into T-Credit, they can make it with just a very small loan that gradually builds, but these people definitely are going to fail. And when you're that poor, the worst thing that can happen to you is to fail with credit.
Mariela?
Besides what Anne said, I mean, as Plan, and I think as most of the organizations that we're working in this, we understand that poverty is a multidimensional thing. So you need to draw a line somewhere, you draw it at the $1.25, but you know it's not as simple as all of that. This is why, whether you call it an add-on, whether you call it the hand-holding, whatever, you have to address those other issues. And I think what's important to know is that the people living in extreme poverty perhaps are not living in extreme poverty just because they're below that 125. There are factors that have kept them in extreme poverty or pushed them into it. Things like living with violence, things like low self-esteem. So it's not just a financial indicator. There are other factors, the other dimensions of poverty, or we call it marginalization and exclusion, that are keeping them below this line. So it's just a line. It's just one common denominator that, as Anne said, helps to try to get some commonality across different countries. But for sure, in our case, we look at the multidimensional. And the other thing I wanted to say is we went with the poverty pyramid. Who was at the bottom of that poverty pyramid in every community? And in some cases, the person who was with nothing, who qualified for our program in one community, was better off than someone who did not qualify in another community because there was an even lower level of extreme poverty in the other community. So it's not like the same line was drawn across all of the 43 communities where we implemented the pilot.
We'll be running out of time, so I'll take all of these questions, but make it extremely brief. There's 4 or 5 hands. I'll take all of you, and then we'll respond together. Just one little point. What BRAC is reaching isn't $1.25. They're really reaching 60 cents. But there is also a non-economic dimension to poverty. So could you just, yes.
Hi, I'm
Very
Federico.
quickly.
I work in a microfinance in Mexico. I have 2 questions. The first one is, what is the key of the success in order that the productive active that you give to them is successful? Because I think it will be a very important lesson for me to understand how do you work with them? How do you train them? How do you work with them in order to be successful, the productive active that you give them? And the second question is, what is the cost of the 2-year program for a person to get out of the extreme poverty?
Next.
Mexican government has 2 programs right now, against hunger and against violence. Some of the points have the 2 situations together. They are asking me to teach them some kind of living, because we work with arts and crafts, so jewelry or handcrafts or all the things that they can do with hands. I see that you have the business point in this ladder. What kind of business do you teach them in this program? Is related with that. And the other question is, in Mexico, these programs, they give a lot of things for free, and that's part of your ladder. In which moment you finish that part of the giving for free and teach them how to fish? Because, for example, in some parts of Mexico, I found that people, they didn't want to work anymore because it was for them more easy to have. They give them money for each kid, they give them food for each kid, so it was easier to have a non-working situation. So I would like to understand where are the limits of your program.
Again, that'll be it.
Very. So my question is, do any of the ultra poor programs that you've developed address the men? That is, all the burden of work and family falls on the women, and we've heard from Mary Ellen and others about the abuse and the abandonment. But is there any effort to try to get men re-engaged with their families? Because this is something I wonder about the whole microfinance world, but wondered about that.
All right. I'll respond to the last one, and then you can respond to a couple others, but we'll have to be very brief. Yes, a lot of the programs do work with men. BRAC doesn't, Foncosi doesn't, but other programs do. The one we had in Yemen was mostly men. The one we have in Pakistan is half and half. The idea really is treating the household and targeting the household. And sometimes it makes sense to work with the man, but it's not like separating them out. It's the conduit. Who do we work through? That's the important thing, and it varies.
Actually, Foncose does work with whatever man is in that household, if there is one. In other words, the whole family is the unit of intervention. We got to get those kids in school, whether there's a school in the community or not. We've got to get that man on his feet and not undercutting the woman at every chance, if we can. But so that's why that case manager is so absolutely critical to the success of the whole thing. We don't succeed with all the men. Some of them do end up leaving. We also have a problem with many of them wanting to come back as soon as they see that their wife is suddenly has assets, but we work with them.
I thought I'd take a little bit of both your questions. On the asset, in Bangladesh, it's mainly livestock and poultry, agriculture assets, and in some cases also for petty trade. We start off petty trade type businesses as well. And of course, in other countries, it's different, so it would have to be context specific. So in places where poultry and livestock wouldn't work, there's no point transferring poultry and livestock. But in Bangladesh, that was a lot of what we did. In terms of actually making sure that they're able to get productivity out of the assets, it's the training that we do, the weekly visits and the very intensive training. If you remember from Chobi's story, which is the video we saw, other kinds of support, so the para-vets coming in to vaccinate the cows, to market linkages. So a lot of things need to be done, obviously, and we try to do as much of that as possible. In countries where, and in Bangladesh, of course, BRAC had an advantage because BRAC was doing a lot of this kind of work anyway, and we were able to integrate all of that into our ultra-poor program. But in other countries and other places, the need for partnerships and have different kinds of organizations come together might be the way to have these kinds of interventions built into the program.
30 seconds.
Okay. To add a little bit to what Anne said, we don't exclude the men, but we know why that decision to go with more women has erupted, because women will invest in their children. The studies have shown that they will turn around and they pay back better, and they use the money for their family. But what we've done is we've actually tried to engage the men for things like responsible fatherhood, that the training sessions on nutrition are not just for the women, and we have to work in order for the men to show up, in order for the men to show care and affection to their children. So that's a whole other piece of work. It's not exclusive. The other thing that I wanted to say about the cost, because I don't think that has been issued, there's a great variety of costs. In Bangladesh, you know, because a greater percentage of the population, let's say, is living in extreme poverty, you can go in and you can deal with, let's say, bigger blocks of people, and you know the return, when you have scale, it's easier. In these areas of Cusco, distance was the problem. And we were the most expensive pilot, but we were the most expensive pilot because it happened in those high Andean, far-to-reach communities in Cusco. If I had done it somewhere else, in Peru, it would have been half or less the cost. So the costs, you have to look at what the issue is in terms of access, and what is keeping those other services, even the government, away from there are those types of issues. So the issue is, are you willing to go where the extreme poor are? Do they have rights too, regardless of where it is, or how costly or how difficult they are to reach? That's what we believe, and I think that that's what we're trying to get at here.
All right.
One
10
more
seconds.
thing.
Shameran.
No, I just wanted to give you a figure in case you were wondering. So in Bangladesh right now, the costs for the 2-year cycle is coming up to about $400. But as Mariela said, it's because Bangladesh has a very high population density, and we're able to reach scale, and hence we have a lot of economies of scale, but that varies anywhere between. So I think Bangladesh is the cheapest at $400 for 2 years.
West
but
Bengal too.
And in India and West Bengal, but then it can go up to, I don't know, $1,800 to $2,000 for the 2 years, which is the more expensive pilots.
It also depends too on how much government services are available. If there is no health care, if there are no schools, if there's no housing allowance or houses being provided, that makes a big difference. I wanted to speak to the question about when do you finish with free? Because I think that's something that really confuses people. Are you really going to get them out of this give me another handout phase? The assets are one time at the beginning, and that's it. There's no more asset transfer after the beginning. The stipend, in our case, our 18-month program, the stipend goes for 6 months, and it stops. There's no condition under which we extend that, and we tell them from the very beginning, this is going to end. What will happen when it ends? And to be perfectly honest, they are so proud that they now have income that they are generating that they can't wait to give it up. I mean, it's really true. They absolutely love it when they can sell a goat, or when they go to the marketplace and they're selling commerce or something, and they come home with their own cash flow. That is a tremendous step forward for them.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. If you want more information, there's a community of practice around graduation programs, and the website is graduation.cgap.org. Before I finish, three announcements. Please have lunch. It's supposed to be a fantastic meal with some performance. And after lunchtime, 2 p.m., that's the last number of workshops. And do please visit the commitments wall. It's at the end of the corridor over here. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.